Hi. We continue in 1 Samuel 20 today as Jonathan, perhaps following his sister's lead, offers a plan to David to help deceive their father Saul, and that David can get away cleanly if Saul is upset with him and still plans to kill him. And of course, we already know that's what's going to happen. But I just want to note as we start that this is all Jonathan's plan, just as it was Michal's plan, as far as we know, to hide, to let David out through the window and then pretend he was there by putting the goat's hair on the teraphim and fooling the servants of Saul until Saul showed up for himself and realized what was happening. Now, similarly, this is all Jonathan's idea. And David says nothing except goes along with the plan, as we see in the end of our paragraph today. So David hid himself in the field. And so a couple of times now, David is subject to people who love him. We're told both Jonathan and Michal love him, coming up with deceptive plans to fool the king to save David's life. And at one level, that all makes sense to us because as biblical readers, we know that David is the quote-unquote hero here, and Saul is the opponent, the murderous opponent. And so we're certainly rooting for David to get away, and we're rooting for Jonathan and Michal to protect him. But at the same time, if we look at it just from a different angle, we recognize that people are lying to the king and saving the life of someone the king wants to kill. And in this case, we're on the side of it because it's David. But it would not take much to twist this in another way and see Jonathan as a traitor to the state and to the people of Israel by betraying the king. So the writers here are doing quite a juxtaposition here, just like in modern TV shows where we root for people like Tony Soprano or Walter White, even though they're doing terrible things. We root for David, who's similarly the godfather character in this story, and Jonathan is in love with him, as we know. But this is all seemingly Jonathan's idea, and I think we'd like to consider that suggestion that David is just being portrayed as sitting there doing nothing while everybody else plots around him, to extend that into the situation in 2 Samuel when David is firmly the king and Saul and Jonathan are both dead, and things seem to happen around David and he disclaims responsibility. It's all too convenient for David that other people plan things to deceive the current king and later to kill his opponents without him claiming responsibility or that it was his idea. So just want to plant that seed here that David is as smarter than you might infer as someone who seems to have no ideas and is just following the lead of Jonathan here. So let's keep that in mind as we go. And yet again, I've changed the 1 Samuel 20 keywords chart here because I added a couple of things that I didn't have before. One is, and I didn't note it because it seems so insignificant at one level, but it becomes significant, which is the word na'ar in Hebrew for the boy, which we've seen earlier in 1 Samuel has been an important character in terms of, whether that's in terms of an erotic, potentially erotic relationship, or in terms of a father-son-like relationship, as we saw with Jonathan and his na'ar earlier at the time of the Battle of Mishmash. But it's also going to be important in the outcome here, and we see it so many times here when the plan that Jonathan lays out here is executed after Saul blows up at him and calls him a terrible name, as we'll see next time. Another thing that I've included here is the fivefold use of the Hebrew henna. And I've been showing throughout this series and others where I work with the Hebrew that the New Revised Standard virtually always leaves out henna, or in Greek, idu, which is the parallel in the New Testament, which are attention words, behold, or look over here. And so sometimes the New Revised Standard puts a word in, ordinary word, as one of these has look, for example, and sometimes it just leaves it out altogether. But I wanted you to see there are 5 uses of it in this one paragraph. So there's a lot of attention getting here, both to the boy, but also between Jonathan and David. Behold, repeated over and over again. So with that in mind, let's begin to jump into our scene here. So we start here in verse 18. Jonathan said to him, "Tomorrow is the new moon." And again, as we looked at before, that's presumably a family festival, and he's already set up a plan so that Jonathan will say that David has a family festival to go to in Bethlehem, and we'll see that next time. So tomorrow's the new moon. You will be missed because your place will be empty. Everything about that verse is subject to some serious translation issues, both in the Hebrew and the Greek. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds on it because most translations are similar to this. But I just want to draw attention to the fact that the Masoretic text twice in this verse uses the verb pqd. It's hard to pronounce without vowels. But the word for to search. And the Septuagint translates it twice with the piskeptomai, to visit, and then uses that word again in verse 19, where the Hebrew does not. So it has this word 3 times in verse 18, the beginning of verse 19. And so what do we make of this, given that there's no apparent word in Hebrew for empty here? And all I could suggest is something like this down below. Rather than you will be missed could be you will be sought. And rather than your place will be empty could be your seat will be looked for. And one translation does have that. But I want to highlight that what we're losing here in the use of words missed and empty is the context of searching. This searching for David, even though it doesn't seem like you're searching because there's just an empty seat. And Saul, as we'll see in the next scene, thinks to himself, the narrator being able to be omniscient in that sense and get into his head. But there's something else going on here. The translation isn't quite covering around the issue of searching. And for place here, it's seat. Your seat will be empty. And that's to say that at a royal feast, David, as the king's whatever he is at this point, has a special place. So Jonathan continues. So having stated the fact that David won't be there, on the day after tomorrow, you shall go a long way down. And that's also a difficult issue here. Samora notes that it literally is you or she, feminine, shall go down well or good, but miad also means powerful or great. So some people take that as toward evening, as the sunset, as Samora does. So when the sun has gone a long way down, although it doesn't mention sun, so it's not a matter of you going a long way down in that sense, it's a matter of the sun going down. But because it does have you, that doesn't make sense to some people, and they take it, miad, as a modifier of speed, to go down quickly. But go down from what isn't clear. Presumably the field is somehow below where the palace is, where Saul lives, but we don't know that. So that's just something within the story that's assumed geographically or topographically on the distance between wherever they are in the field and wherever the house is. So go to the place where you hid yourself earlier, and this is also a translation. The word here, hamaseh, literally means the work, and that leads some translators to do things like, as you can see in my note below, this trouble or the matter, to recognize there's something going on there, and that earlier it's not a temporal reference at all. And not only that, narratively, when did David hide himself anywhere earlier? We haven't seen him hide himself before. Jonathan and David came out in the field together to have a private conversation, but we've not seen David hiding in a way that would be obvious what's being referred to. And obviously they're going to be in the same field they're talking in right now. So there's a translation issue there. And remain beside the stone there. And there's yet another one here, because although the New Revised Standard has there, many translations have this as a proper noun, ezel, the stone ezel, which can also be translated then as the stone of departure or the stone of going away, which makes sense since that's exactly what's at issue here. And Hebrew Bible does that often, names fields or caves or stones, especially we see in Genesis, names related to the activity that was going on there. Although in this case, it's named that before the activity happens, but that happens sometimes too in the Bible. So we can either have it just an unnamed stone in that location or the stone ezel. And so when David is there in that place, Jonathan tells him, this is what he will do. He will shoot 3 arrows. But we saw in 18:4, let's go back to that here, Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David and his armor and even his sword and his bow and his belt. So if he's already given David his bow in chapter 18, what does he have now? And that's what leads scholars to wonder about sources and that kind of thing. But perhaps he has more than one bow, or perhaps he gave them to him symbolically and David gave them back. We just don't know. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it as though I shot at a mark is a lovely play here, not exactly a play on words, but a play on concepts. Because as my note below says, this is practically the very definition of chatat, translated as sin, which is, as we've seen before, an archery term meaning to miss the mark. And it's rare that the Bible deals with archery. In fact, I could not find any place where arrows are actually shot in the Bible at somebody or at something. Of the 55 times that I found that the word chetz here for arrow, which literally means lot or fortune, is used, it's many times metaphorically for God's arrows as an expression of God's weapons, or in the Psalms, an expression of enemies' arrows or also of God's arrows, but almost always either metaphorically or anticipatory of the possibility that someone might shoot arrows at you or have archers. But curiously, as I said, I didn't find any place where people actually shoot arrows into something. Later in Samuel, people will kill each other with spears poked into them, but we won't see arrows. Only in 2 Kings 13 do we ever see arrows again in the rest of the Deuteronomistic history, other than in this one scene in 2 Samuel 22. There's the echo of Hatat in the air, and that was at the beginning of the previous chapter when David complained, "What is my sin?" And the word for mark here, lamatara here, is only here in the Torah or the Deuteronomistic history. It's used a number of times in Jeremiah, and a couple of times, curiously, for Yahweh's assault on a person. That people are lined up as if they're a target, and Yahweh's arrows are going to penetrate them as a kind of punishment. So a dark image from elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible. So once he shoots 3 arrows, then he will send the boy, which is assumed that we know about the boy here, but this is actually the answer to David's question in verse 10. How will Jonathan inform David if Saul's response is negative, and that he does intend to kill David? So then he will send the boy, but he doesn't say, "I'll go get the boy," but he'll send the boy, saying, "Go," and this is where the various hinnas are that you can see here. "Find the arrows, and if I say, 'Look, another hinna, the arrows are on this side of you, collect them,' then you are to come. For as Yahweh lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger." And we see shalom here. Here's our shalom example. And that's, of course, not only shalom for David, but shalom for everybody. Again, another translation issue here. There's no real word for danger here. It's literally, there is no word, which is to say there's no negative word that Saul is planning to kill him. Translated here as no danger. But, as Bodner notes, if Saul is disposed to do evil with David, then David will have to imitate an arrow and take flight himself. And that's certainly part of the play that's at issue here. But if I say to the young man, using a different word here, curiously, out of all the times that boy is used, this is one that's not the same word, and hence it's not one of the boy passages here. Why it's varied, who knows? And another hint here, the arrows are beyond you, then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And of course, the arrows symbolically express that. The ones that are beyond the stone of departure are pointing toward the place of departure, and the ones that are on this side, which is, say, on the Jonathan side, are, if not literally pointing, or at least compared to the rock, are pointing back to where Jonathan is. So the boy could figure that out if he knew that David was there, but obviously he's not going to know, and we'll find out explicitly he doesn't know when we see the scene unfold a little later. But as for the matter, again, the word here, it was word here, davar, and it's word here. Davar has a wide semantic range in biblical Hebrew. So as for the word about which you and I have spoken, which is to say the covenant, Yahweh is witness between you and me forever. And so it's ending after this little plan of deceiving Saul with the arrows with the affirmation of this covenant. And again, notice that David is not speaking throughout this whole thing, but he listens to Saul. And we'll end this here on this first half of the verse, because plainly we start a new scene here when the new moon came and Saul sits down at the feast. So David hides himself in the field, and he's going to be there for more than a day. And it's a curious thing that the text doesn't say anything about David's experience hiding out in the field overnight, not knowing if Saul will respond the first day to his absence or wait till the second day, which is in fact what happens. And so in our next video, we'll see the ugly scene between Saul and his father Jonathan. Saul and his son Jonathan at the festival table. See you next time for that. Bye-bye.